The year 1834, in the quiet, unassuming town of Willow Creek, Ohio, felt perpetually veiled in a layer of hushed reverence, broken only by the distant chime of the convent bells. I was a boy of 13, named Samuel, with a mop of unruly brown hair and a boundless curiosity that often led me to places where adults deemed children ought not to be. My father was the town's carpenter, a man of strong hands and even stronger faith, and my mother, a gentle soul who filled our small cottage with the scent of freshly baked bread and the quiet comfort of her hymns. Our lives were simple, dictated by the rhythm of dawn prayers and dusk chores. Yet, that year, the simplicity was shattered, and the chimes of the convent bells began to toll not just for prayer, but for a chilling, unfathomable sorrow. Everyone in Willow Creek knew of the Convent of the Sacred Heart. It stood majestically, on a low hill at the edge of town, a grand stone edifice with arched windows and a serene, almost ethereal aura. It had been built almost 50 years prior by French nuns seeking refuge, and over time it had become a symbol of peace and devotion in our small, burgeoning community. The nuns, cloistered from the world, were rarely seen outside the convent walls, save for a few occasions when they would visit the infirm or deliver their exquisite hand-stitched garments to the town's small market. They were a vision of tranquil piety, their dark habits and quiet smiles a comforting presence in our Protestant-dominated town. My connection to the convent was a bit more direct than most. My Aunt Martha, my mother's elder sister, had taken the veil almost a decade ago, becoming Sister Agnes. She was a kind, gentle woman, always with a soft word and a warm gaze. Before she joined the order, she had often visited us, bringing small, carved wooden birds for me and singing lullabies to my younger sister. Her decision to become a nun had been met with a mixture of pride and quiet sadness by my family. Now, her presence was felt mostly through the occasional handwritten note delivered by the convent's young handyman, a quiet boy named Thomas, who had an unnervingly serious demeanor for his 14 years. These notes, always brief and filled with blessings, were our only glimpse into Aunt Martha's cloistered world. Life in Willow Creek was typically uneventful. The biggest excitements were the annual Harvest Festival, the occasional traveling preacher, or the arrival of new settlers passing through on their way further west. The convent, with its steady routine of prayer and quiet industry, was a constant, unchanging fixture. The nuns, numbering around 30 at the time, were known for their robust health, their strict diet and disciplined lives seemingly keeping illness at bay. They rarely fell sick, and when they did, it was usually a fleeting ailment quickly overcome. This general good health was a point of quiet pride for the town, a testament to the purity of their lives. The first sign that something was amiss came not with an urgent alarm, but with a subtle, unsettling disruption of routine. It was a crisp morning in early March, the air still carrying the bite of winter. My father was already in his workshop, the rhythmic thud of his hammer echoing through the silent streets. I was on my way to fetch water from the well, when I saw old Mr. Henderson, the town's only undertaker, hurrying towards the convent path, his usually leisurely gait replaced by an uncharacteristic urgency. He was a somber man, accustomed to death, but even from a distance I could sense an unusual grimness about him. A few minutes later the convent bells tolled, not with their usual melodic chime for morning prayers, but with a slow, mournful peal that signified a passing. One bell. Just one. It was sad, but not alarming. Old Sister Mary Magdalene, the convent's oldest nun, had been ailing for some time. We assumed it was her. But then the next morning, the bell tolled again. And again the morning after that. Not the usual funeral tolls, but single, isolated peals, signifying one death at a time. 3 deaths in 3 days. This was highly unusual. Whispers began to spread through Willow Creek. It was said that the new handyman, Thomas, who brought the messages to town, looked terribly pale. his eyes wide with an unspoken fear. My mother began to worry, her hands fretting over her prayer beads. She sent me with a small basket of fresh eggs and a note to Aunt Martha, asking after her health. I walked the familiar path to the convent, my usual eagerness replaced by a growing unease. The convent grounds, usually teeming with silent activity. Nuns tending gardens, washing laundry, or gathering herbs, were eerily quiet. The main gate, usually left ajar during the day, was closed. I knocked, and after a long moment, the small, sliding peephole opened. A pair of tired, red-rimmed eyes peered out. It was Sister Anne, the youngest of the novitiates, usually so cheerful. Her face was ashen, her lips trembling. "I have eggs for Aunt Martha, for Sister Agnes," I said, holding up the basket. "And a note from my mother." Sister Anne's eyes darted nervously. "Sister Agnes, she is not well, Samuel," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "No one is well. The fever, it takes them." My blood ran cold. The fever. "What fever?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "It comes suddenly, a terrible headache, then chills, then a burning fever that consumes them, and then they are gone. So quickly. 12 of them, Samuel, in less than a week. Healthy women, just days ago." Her voice cracked, and she pulled away from the peephole, the small opening clicking shut. 12. 12 deaths in less than a week. The number hit me like a physical blow. Not just old Sister Mary Magdalene, but 12 healthy nuns, struck down by a mysterious, rapidly escalating fever. I stood there for a long moment, paralyzed by the chilling revelation. The quiet, peaceful Convent of the Sacred Heart, a symbol of serenity, had become a house of death, its secrets shrouded behind stone walls. I clutched the basket of eggs, now feeling impossibly heavy, and hurried back to town, my young mind reeling from the terrifying truth. The bells of the convent, I realized with a profound dread, were not just tolling for the dead. They were ringing for a mystery, a chilling secret that was rapidly consuming the very heart of Willow Creek. And I, a curious boy, had just heard the first terrifying whispers of its unspeakable horror. I burst through the door of our small cottage, the basket of untouched eggs still clutched in my trembling hand, my mind a swirling chaos of fear and disbelief. The quiet hum of our home, usually so comforting, now felt strangely alien, a stark contrast to the chilling silence of the convent grounds and Sister Anne's tearful confession. My mother, humming softly as she kneaded dough at the kitchen table, looked up, her gentle smile faltering as she saw my ashen face. My father, wiping his hands on a rag as he emerged from his workshop, his brow furrowed in concern, immediately sensed that something was gravely amiss. "Samuel." "What is it, son?" my father asked, his voice firm but laced with worry. "You look as if you've seen a ghost." "Worse than a ghost, father," I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper, the words catching in my throat. I set the basket down on the table with a thud, the eggs rattling precariously. "It's the convent, Sister Anne. She said 12 of them, 12 healthy nuns, in less than a week, a fever. It takes them so quickly." My mother's hands stilled on the dough, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning horror. 12, Samuel, are you certain?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Not just old Sister Mary Magdalene?" "No, Mama," I insisted, my voice gaining a desperate urgency. "Sister Anne said no one is well. She said Aunt Martha. Sister Agnes. She is not well either. The fever, it comes so fast." The memory of Sister Anne's terrified eyes, her quivering lips, was vivid in my mind. My father, a man who rarely showed overt emotion, visibly paled. He walked to the window, his gaze fixed on the distant hill where the convent stood, its stone walls now seeming less serene and more like a fortress hiding unspeakable sorrow. 12 healthy women, he murmured, more to himself than to us. That's not natural. Not even a bad fever takes that many, that quickly, from a healthy community. His logical, grounded mind immediately recognized the terrifying anomaly. The news spread through Willow Creek like wildfire. I had barely finished recounting my terrifying encounter to my parents before my father, recognizing the immediate danger, strode out to inform the town council and Dr. Elias Thorne, the town's only physician. He returned a short while later, his face grim. Dr. Thorne, a man of science and logic, was, by all accounts, deeply disturbed by the news. He had immediately prepared his medical bag and, accompanied by a few brave members of the town council, had set off for the convent, his usual confident stride replaced by a hurried, almost frantic pace. The day stretched into an agonizing eternity. The convent bells remained silent, a stark contrast to the mournful peals of the preceding mornings. This silence was more chilling than any tolling, suggesting a profound paralysis within the convent walls. The town itself seemed to hold its breath. Shops closed early, conversations died in hushed whispers, and children were called indoors, their usual boisterous games replaced by an eerie quiet. People stood in small groups, their faces pale, their eyes fixed on the distant hill, as if waiting for a sign, any sign, of what horrors were unfolding there. Fear, cold and insidious, began to seep into the very foundations of Willow Creek. As evening approached, a small group of figures emerged from the convent gates. It was Dr. Thorne and the council members. Their faces, even from a distance, looked ashen, their usual composure shattered. Dr. Thorne's usually immaculate clothes were disheveled, and his hair, usually neatly combed, was wildly mussed. As they neared the town square, they were immediately swarmed by anxious townsfolk desperate for answers. "It's true," Dr. Thorne announced, his voice hoarse, his gaze haunted. 12 souls lost, in less than a week, and more are ill. The fever is unlike anything I have ever encountered. It strikes with terrifying speed. A sudden headache, excruciating chills, a burning fever that consumes them within hours, and then death. He visibly shuddered, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. Their eyes were wide with terror, even in their delirium, as if they knew, as if they saw something. He then delivered the chilling decree. The convent must be quarantined, no one in, no one out, for the safety of the town, and for the sake of those still inside. We cannot risk this contagion spreading beyond its walls. I've sent for more medical supplies from the nearest city, but travel is slow. We must pray. The word quarantine hung in the air, a heavy, suffocating blanket. It painted a terrifying picture. The serene convent of the Sacred Heart, once a sanctuary, now a death trap, sealed off from the world, its inhabitants left to battle an unseen enemy alone. My mother burst into tears, her hands trembling as she thought of Aunt Martha trapped inside. My father, his jaw tight, put an arm around her, his eyes fixed on the distant convent. The fear for my aunt, for Sister Agnes, now felt like a living thing, a cold hand squeezing my heart. Over the next few days, the convent became an island of dread. No bells tolled, no figures were seen in the gardens, only the occasional glimpse of Mr. Henderson's somber wagon making its way up the hill, signaling yet another funeral being conducted within the quarantined walls. Each sighting sent a fresh wave of despair through the town. The initial count of 12 had grown, whispered, from a few remaining convent servants who had been sent away before the full lockdown. Now, it was 17, then 20. The thought of Aunt Martha, a kind, gentle woman, succumbing to this terrifying unknown disease, was unbearable. Dr. Thorne, despite his exhaustion, held daily briefings in the town square, his face growing grimmer with each passing day. He spoke of the symptoms, of the nun's rapidly deteriorating health, of his futile attempts to stem the tide of the illness. He confessed his bewilderment, his inability to diagnose or treat the mysterious fever. Their vitality, their robust health? It makes no sense, he'd lament, gesturing helplessly. It is as if their very life force is being drained from them. He never used the word plague, but the unspoken terror of it hung in the air. My curiosity, though often leading me into trouble, now morphed into a desperate need for answers. I couldn't bear to just sit and wait, knowing Aunt Martha was trapped within those walls. I started lurking around the convent perimeter, always hidden, always careful. I observed the handful of townsfolk who stood vigil, their faces pale and, drawn, their prayers whispered into the silent air. I saw Thomas, the young handyman, at a distance. He looked like a ghost, his shoulders slumped, his eyes vacant. He wasn't bringing messages anymore, just carrying empty buckets to the well, his movements slow and lifeless. One afternoon, as I watched from a thicket of pines, I saw Dr. Thorne and Constable McGregor arguing heatedly at the convent gate. Their voices, though muffled by the distance, carried an edge of desperation. McGregor seemed to be demanding something, pointing emphatically towards the convent. Dr. Thorne, shaking his head, vehemently refused, his arms crossed. I strained to hear, but only snippets of their conversation reached me. "Can't risk it, Constable. The contagion." And, "Duty-bound, Doctor. The town demands answers." It was clear that the town's patience was wearing thin, and McGregor was under pressure to take more drastic measures. As they argued, a small detail caught my eye. Thomas, the handyman, was standing near the well, his back to them, silently filling a bucket. He looked utterly defeated. As he lifted the heavy bucket, a small dark object slipped from his pocket and fell to the ground, unnoticed by the arguing adults. It was a rosary, old and worn, but with a strange dark gleam on its crucifix. He picked it up quickly, glancing nervously over his shoulder at the gate before tucking it back into his pocket. Something about the way he moved, the furtive glance, struck me as odd. It wasn't the way one would normally handle a religious item. It was as if he was hiding it. That night, the bells tolled again. Not once, but twice. Another two sisters had fallen. My mother cried herself to sleep, clutching Aunt Martha's last note. The terror was escalating, and the silence of the convent had become a scream. I lay awake, my mind replaying the argument at the gate, the quiet desolation of Thomas, and the strange, dark glint of the rosary. It was a small detail, perhaps insignificant, but in a town consumed by an unfathomable plague, every anomaly gnawed at my young, curious mind. The official explanation of a mysterious fever no longer satisfied me. Something else was happening inside the convent of the Sacred Heart, something far more sinister. And I, Samuel, a boy burdened by curiosity and fear for his aunt, felt an undeniable pull towards unraveling its chilling truth. The silence of the convent had become a scream, a chilling void that echoed the growing fear in Willow Creek. Each morning that passed without the familiar peal of the bells was a fresh torment, only broken by the grim sight of Mr. Henderson's wagon making its way up the hill, a silent harbinger of another lost soul. My mother continued to fret, her prayers for Aunt Martha growing more desperate with each passing day. My father, though outwardly stoic, carried a deep worry in his eyes, his usual practicality undermined by the inexplicable nature of the illness. Dr. Thorne's daily briefings grew more disheartening, his bewilderment deepening as the death toll climbed. 22. Then 25. The numbers, whispered through the town, were a grim tally of a community under siege from an unseen enemy. My mind, however, refused to accept the simple explanation of a mysterious fever, the memory of Sister Anne's terrified eyes, the rapid, Onset of the symptoms, and most importantly, the strange, dark glint of Thomas the handyman's rosary gnawed at me. It was a small detail, seemingly insignificant amidst such widespread tragedy, but it felt wrong. It didn't fit. Why would a devout boy, a handyman for a convent, handle a religious item with such furtive caution? Why did it seem to hold a strange, unnatural sheen? My curiosity, once just a childish inclination, had morphed into an insistent, burning need for answers. I couldn't sit idly by while Aunt Martha, a woman who had filled my childhood with warmth and kindness, possibly succumbed. To this terrifying unknown, I resolved to get closer, to observe Thomas more closely, to find out what he was hiding. The quarantine around the convent was strict, enforced by Constable McGregor and a few volunteers. Guards patrolled the perimeter, ensuring no one entered or left. But the sheer size of the convent grounds, the dense woods that surrounded it, and my intimate knowledge of every hidden path and forgotten creek bed from years of playing hide-and-seek gave me an advantage. I started spending my afternoons, whenever I could escape my chores, lurking in the thickets of pines near the convent well, always hidden, always careful, my eyes fixed on Thomas. He was a solitary figure, always alone when he came to the well, his movements slow and weary. He still looked like a ghost, his shoulders slumped, his eyes vacant, haunted by the horrors he witnessed inside. But there was also a furtiveness about him, a quick, nervous glance around before he would dip his bucket. I watched him fill the buckets, the water splashing, reflecting the dull sky. And then, as he would lift the full buckets, his sleeves would often fall back, revealing his wrists. That's when I saw it, on the third afternoon of my covert observations, a faint, dark discoloration on his wrist, almost like a bruise, but with an odd, unhealthy tint. And around his fingers, as he gripped the bucket handle, a faint reddish-brown residue that he would quickly wipe away on his trousers. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. And it was exactly the same color as the dark glint I had seen on the crucifix of his rosary. My heart pounded. What was that residue? What was on his wrist? It looked almost like rust, but darker, more insidious. And it was clearly not from the well water. My mind raced, trying to connect this new piece of information to the fever. Could it be something he was touching? Something he was handling regularly? The thought of the rosary returned to me. I remembered how he had quickly snatched it up, how he had glanced around nervously. It was an old, worn item, usually carried close to one's heart, a symbol of faith and comfort. But Thomas treated it as if it were something dangerous, something to be hidden. I decided I needed to get closer, to actually see the rosary, to understand what that dark gleam was. The opportunity came the next morning. Thomas, exhausted from a night of tending to the sick, had left his empty buckets by the well and gone inside for a brief rest, leaving the area unguarded. It was a risk, a dangerous one, but I knew I couldn't pass it up. I waited until I was sure no one was watching, then slipped out of the pines, moving quickly and silently towards the well. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the silence of the convent grounds. The air felt heavy, stagnant, imbued with a palpable sense of dread. I reached the well, my eyes darting around, scanning the empty courtyard. The buckets stood there, silent sentinels, reflecting the gray sky. And then I saw it, lying on the stone ledge of the well, almost hidden by a loose piece of cloth, was Thomas's rosary. He must have left it there by accident, perhaps in his exhaustion. It was old, the beads worn smooth from countless prayers. But the crucifix was not silver as I had initially thought. It was iron, tarnished and blackened, with a strange reddish-brown residue clinging to its surface, particularly in the intricate crevices of the figure of Christ. It was the same residue I had seen on his fingers, the same color as the mark on his wrist. My fingers trembled as I reached out, my own heart hammering. I hesitated for a moment, an instinctual fear warning me against touching it. But the burning need for answers, for Aunt Martha, for all the fallen sisters, outweighed my fear. I carefully picked up the rosary, holding it by a bead, trying not to touch the crucifix directly. The metal was cold, oddly heavy, and a faint metallic smell, vaguely like stale blood, emanated from the crucifix. I turned it over in my hand, examining it closely. The residue was thick, almost like dried mud, but with that strange, unnatural sheen. As I rotated the crucifix, a tiny, almost imperceptible sliver of the black, tarnished iron flaked off onto my fingertip. I instinctively rubbed it between. My thumb and forefinger, and a burning sensation, a sudden sharp sting, shot through my skin. I yelped, dropping the rosary back onto the stone ledge as if it were a red-hot coal. A small black mark, like a tiny burn, appeared on my fingertip. It didn't blister, but it stung intensely. My mind reeled. This wasn't rust. This wasn't dirt. This was something else. Something corrosive. Something that burned. The dark glint, the strange residue, the mark on Thomas's wrist, the rapid onset of the fever in the nuns, the drained vitality Dr. Thorne spoke of. A horrifying, unthinkable possibility began to form in my mind, a chilling connection that made my blood run cold. I snatched up the rosary again, this time gripping it solely by the beads, and quickly wrapped it in the loose cloth I had brought. I slipped it into my pocket, the burning sensation on my finger a searing reminder of my discovery. I needed to get out of there. I needed to show this to Dr. Thorne. But how? The convent was under quarantine. I couldn't simply walk up to the gate with the rosary. As I crept away from the well, my heart still pounding, I glanced back at the convent building. The silence was still there, but now it felt different. It was no longer a silence of serenity, but a silence of unspeakable secrets, of a dark, insidious poison. And the rosary, a symbol of faith, now seemed twisted, corrupted, a chilling instrument of death. I knew then that the fever was not just a natural illness. It was something orchestrated, something deliberately introduced, and the key, the terrifying truth, was now burning a small hole in my pocket. The hunt for answers had just taken a deadly turn. The next morning, the Convent of the Sacred Heart was no longer an island of dread, but a beehive of grim activity. The silence of death had been shattered by the urgent shouts of men, the creak of wagon wheels, and the low, authoritative voices of the law. Sheriff Brody, a formidable man from the county seat, his face set in grim lines, arrived with a contingent of deputies, their badges gleaming dully in the morning light. Constable McGregor, though still visibly shaken, seemed to find a renewed purpose, his movements now brisk and decisive, driven by the undeniable proof Dr. Thorne had presented. My father and I, after a restless night, watched from a safe distance as the grim spectacle unfolded. The first target of their investigation was clear. Thomas, the young handyman. He was found in the convent infirmary, tending to the few remaining sick nuns, his face ashen, his eyes vacant. He offered no resistance as deputies gently but firmly took him outside. Dr. Thorne, his medical bag open, immediately began examining Thomas's hands and wrists, confirming the telltale black marks that burned my own fingertip. Thomas stood motionless, his head bowed, a figure of profound despair and silent resignation. There was no defiance in him, only a crushing defeat. Sheriff Brody, his voice low but piercing, began the interrogation on the spot, under the watchful eyes of the curious townsfolk who had gathered. Thomas, the sheriff began, Dr. Thorne has confirmed that the substance on this rosary, he held up the very crucifix I had given the doctor, now in a small glassine bag, is a potent, slow-acting poison, It's the cause of these deaths. And the marks on your hands. They tell a chilling tale. Thomas remained silent, his gaze fixed on the ground. McGregor, losing his patience, stepped forward. "Speak, boy. Who put you up to this? Why would you do such a thing to these holy women?" It was Dr. Thorne who intervened, his voice surprisingly gentle. "He's sick, Constable. The marks indicate prolonged exposure. He's been poisoning himself as well, perhaps unknowingly, or perhaps by necessity. He's merely a symptom of a much larger malady." His words suggested a terrifying possibility. Thomas was not the mastermind, but another victim, forced into this heinous act. Finally, Thomas lifted his head, his eyes, hollow and haunted, meeting the sheriff's. His voice, when it came, was a raspy whisper, barely audible. I had no choice, sirs. They made me." "Who, Thomas? Who made you do this?" Sheriff Brody pressed, leaning closer. Thomas shuddered, a convulsion running through his slight frame. He darted a terrified glance towards the convent's main entrance, then towards the windows of the Mother Superior's office on the second floor. "Mother Superior Agnes? No, not Agnes. Mother Superior Althea." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Mother Superior Althea, the revered head of the convent, a woman of stern piety and unwavering authority, was the last person anyone would suspect. She was seen as the very embodiment of grace and devotion. The accusation seemed almost blasphemous. "Mother Superior Althea?" McGregor spluttered, incredulous. "That's preposterous, boy. She's a saint." But Sheriff Brody's eyes narrowed, a new understanding dawning. He had seen enough wickedness in his years to know that evil often hid behind the most respectable masks. He immediately dispatched deputies to secure Mother Superior Althea, while others, guided by Dr. Thorne, began a meticulous search of the convent's interior, particularly the kitchen, the infirmary, and the private quarters of the Mother Superior. Hours passed in a tense, agonizing blur. The deputies eventually emerged from the convent, their faces grim, Mother Superior Althea walking between them, her head held high, her expression one of cold disdain rather than fear. She looked utterly unrepentant, her eyes blazing with an almost fanatical zeal. She denied everything, of course, her voice sharp and dismissive. "This is an outrage, a monstrous fabrication. God will punish you all for this sacrilege." But her words rang hollow, lacking the true indignation of an innocent woman. Meanwhile, the search of the convent yielded chilling discoveries. In the Mother Superior's private chambers, hidden beneath a loose floorboard, deputies found a small, meticulously kept journal. Its pages were filled not with prayers or spiritual reflections, but with precise notes on the effects of various substances on the human body, meticulously detailing symptoms, dosages, and timelines. It was a terrifying log of her monstrous experiment. And hidden within its pages was a vial of the very same corrosive substance found on the rosary, unlabeled and carefully stored. The true poison, meticulously concocted and administered. But the most damning evidence came from Thomas's confession, painstakingly extracted by Sheriff Brody, who, with Dr. Thorne's help, managed to calm the terrified handyman. Thomas revealed a tale of coercion and manipulation. Mother Superior Althea, he explained, had discovered his desperate need for work, his widowed mother and ailing siblings relying on his meager earnings. She had offered him a position, a place within the convent walls, seemingly out of charity. But soon, the charity had twisted into blackmail. She had tasked him with applying a special polish to the convent's older iron rosaries, claiming it was to protect them from rust and enhance their sacred appearance. He was told to apply it meticulously, especially to the crucifixes, where the nun's fingers would most often touch during prayer. He had been given vague warnings about its strength and advised to wear gloves, though the worn leather pair he used provided little real protection. He hadn't known it was poison, not at first. But as the nuns began to sicken and the marks on his own hands grew worse, he had suspected. He had tried to refuse, but Mother Superior Althea had threatened to cut off his family's meager support, to cast them out into a war-torn world. He was trapped, a terrified pawn in a wicked game. The motive, however, remained elusive. Why? Why would a Mother Superior systematically murder her own sisters? The journal provided some terrifying clues, hinting at a twisted ideology, but no clear answer. The sheriff's investigation shifted to uncovering the ultimate motive behind this horrific act. My heart ached for Aunt Martha, for all the nuns still suffering inside. We had uncovered the truth of what happened and how and who was directly responsible. But the chilling why still hung heavy in the poisoned air of Willow Creek, a mystery that continued to shroud the Convent of the Sacred Heart in its dark embrace. The full depths of Mother Superior Althea's depravity and the true reason for the deaths of 12 healthy nuns were yet to be fully exposed. The next morning, the Convent of the Sacred Heart was no longer an island of dread, but a beehive of grim activity. The silence of death had been shattered by the urgent shouts of men, the creak of wagon wheels, and the low, authoritative voices of the law. Sheriff Brody, a formidable man from the county seat, his face set in grim lines, arrived with a contingent of deputies, their badges gleaming dully in the morning light. Constable McGregor, though still visibly shaken, seemed to find a renewed purpose, his movements now brisk and decisive, driven by the undeniable proof Dr. Thorne had presented. My father and I, after a restless night, watched from a safe distance as the grim spectacle unfolded. The first target of their investigation was clear: Thomas, the young handyman. He was found in the convent infirmary, tending to the few remaining sick nuns, his face ashen, his eyes vacant. He offered no resistance as deputies gently but firmly took him outside. Dr. Thorne, his medical bag open, immediately began examining Thomas's hands and wrists, confirming the telltale black marks that burned my own fingertip. Thomas stood motionless, his head bowed, a figure of profound despair and silent resignation. There was no defiance in him, only a crushing defeat. Sheriff Brody, his voice low but piercing, began the interrogation on the spot, under the watchful eyes of the curious townsfolk who had gathered. Thomas, the sheriff began, Dr. Thorne has confirmed that the substance on this rosary, he held up the very crucifix I had given the doctor, now in a small glassine bag, is a potent, slow-acting poison. It's the cause of these deaths. And the marks on your hands. They tell a chilling tale. Thomas remained silent, his gaze fixed on the ground. McGregor, losing his patience, stepped forward. Speak, boy. Who put you up to this? Why would you do such a thing to these holy women? It was Dr. Thorne who intervened, his voice surprisingly gentle. He's sick, Constable. The marks indicate prolonged exposure. He's been poisoning himself as well, perhaps unknowingly, or perhaps by necessity. He's merely a symptom of a much larger malady. His words suggested a terrifying possibility. Thomas was not the mastermind, but another victim, forced into this heinous act. Finally, Thomas lifted his head, his eyes, hollow and haunted, meeting the sheriff's. His voice, when it came, was a raspy whisper, barely audible. I had no choice, sirs. They made me. Who, Thomas? Who made you do this? Sheriff Brody pressed, leaning closer. Thomas shuddered, a convulsion running through his slight frame. He darted a terrified glance towards the convent's main entrance, then towards the windows of the Mother Superior's office on the second floor. Mother Superior Agnes? No, not Agnes. Mother Superior Althea. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Mother Superior Althea, the revered head of the convent, a woman of stern piety and unwavering authority, was the last person anyone would suspect. She was seen as the very embodiment of grace and devotion. The accusation seemed almost blasphemous. "Mother Superior Althea?" McGregor spluttered, incredulous. "That's preposterous, boy. She's a saint." But Sheriff Brody's eyes narrowed, a new understanding dawning. He had seen enough wickedness in his years to know that evil often hid behind the most respectable masks. He immediately dispatched deputies to secure Mother Superior Althea, while others, guided by Dr. Thorne, began a meticulous search of the convent's interior, particularly the kitchen, the infirmary, and the private quarters of the Mother Superior. Hours passed in a tense, agonizing blur. The deputies eventually emerged from the convent, their faces grim, Mother Superior Althea walking between them, her head held high, her expression one of cold disdain rather than fear. She looked utterly unrepentant, her eyes blazing with an almost fanatical zeal. She denied everything, of course, her voice sharp and dismissive. "This is an outrage, a monstrous fabrication. God will punish you all for this sacrilege." But her words rang hollow, lacking the true indignation of an innocent woman. Meanwhile, the search of the convent yielded chilling discoveries. In the Mother Superior's private chambers, hidden beneath a loose floorboard, deputies found a small, meticulously kept journal. Its pages were filled not with prayers or spiritual reflections, but with precise notes on the effects of various substances on the human body, meticulously detailing symptoms, dosages, and timelines. It was a terrifying log of her monstrous experiment. And hidden within its pages was a vial of the very same corrosive substance found on the rosary, unlabeled and carefully stored. The true poison, meticulously concocted and administered. But the most damning evidence came from Thomas's confession, painstakingly extracted by Sheriff Brody, who, with Dr. Thorne's help, managed to calm the terrified handyman. Thomas revealed a tale of coercion and manipulation. Mother Superior Althea, he explained, had discovered his desperate need for work, his widowed mother and ailing siblings relying on his meager earnings. She had offered him a position, a place within the convent walls, seemingly out of charity. But soon, the charity had twisted into blackmail. She had tasked him with applying a special polish to the convent's older iron rosaries, claiming it was to protect them from rust and enhance their sacred appearance. He was told to apply it meticulously, especially to the crucifixes, where the nun's fingers would most often touch during prayer. He had been given vague warnings about its strength and advised to wear gloves, though the worn leather pair he used provided little real protection. He hadn't known it was poison, not at first. But as the nuns began to sicken and the marks on his own hands grew worse, he had suspected. He had tried to refuse, but Mother Superior Althea had threatened to cut off his family's meager support, to cast them out into a war-torn world. He was trapped, a terrified pawn in a wicked game. The motive, however, remained elusive. Why? Why would a Mother Superior systematically murder her own sisters? The journal provided some terrifying clues, hinting at a twisted ideology, but no clear answer. The sheriff's investigation shifted to uncovering the ultimate motive behind this horrific act. My heart ached for Aunt Martha, for all the nuns still suffering inside. We had uncovered the truth of what happened and how and who was directly responsible. But the chilling why still hung heavy in the poisoned air of Willow Creek, a mystery that continued to shroud the Convent of the Sacred Heart in its dark embrace. The full depths of Mother Superior Althea's depravity and the true reason for the deaths of 12 healthy nuns were yet to be fully exposed. The chilling revelation that Mother Superior Althea, the revered head of the Convent of the Sacred Heart, was the architect of this monstrous crime sent a shiver through Willow Creek that went deeper than any fear of contagion. It was a profound betrayal, a shattering of faith in a figure once considered beyond reproach. The town, already reeling from the mounting death toll, now grappled with the terrifying reality that evil had festered not outside, but within the very sanctuary of their devotion. My father and I, after witnessing the arrest and the initial discoveries, returned home, the quiet of our cottage a stark contrast to the tumult that now engulfed the convent. My mother, still weeping for Aunt Martha, found a new layer of grief in the knowledge that her sister's suffering was not a random act of fate, but a deliberate cruelty. Sheriff Brody, a man of methodical precision, wasted no time. With Mother, Superior Althea under guard, and Thomas recovering in the infirmary, his confession a torrent of terrified whispers, the sheriff's focus shifted to deciphering the enigma of her motive. The journal found in her private chambers became the key. Dr. Thorne, his weariness replaced by a grim determination, spent hours poring over its chilling contents, his medical expertise now applied to the macabre notes on human toxicology. Meanwhile, deputies meticulously combed through Althea's personal effects, her correspondence, and the convent's financial records, searching for any clue that might illuminate the darkness within her soul. The town, meanwhile, was a cauldron of whispers and speculation. Some refused to believe it, clinging to the image of their saintly Mother Superior, dismissing the evidence as a conspiracy or the ravings of a terrified boy. Others, particularly those who had lost loved ones within the convent, felt a cold fury, their grief transmuted into a burning desire for justice. My father, with his quiet dignity, continued to serve as a steady anchor for our family, but I saw the deep sorrow in his eyes, a profound disappointment in the face of such calculated wickedness. I, too, felt a mixture of outrage and a strange, almost morbid fascination. What could possibly drive a woman of God to such unspeakable depths of depravity? Dr. Thorne emerged from the convent after 2 grueling days, his face pale, his eyes wide with a chilling understanding. He held the Mother Superior's journal, its cover worn, its pages now revealing a narrative far more terrifying than any plague. He convened another meeting in the town square, this time not to report deaths, but to deliver a truth that would forever stain the serene image of the Convent of the Sacred Heart. The motive, Dr. Thorne began, his voice hoarse, is a twisted tapestry of ambition, fanaticism, and a desperate, unholy quest for purity. He paused, taking a shaky breath, clearly disturbed by what he had uncovered. Mother Superior Althea believed that the Convent of the Sacred Heart had become tainted, too earthly, too reliant on worldly comforts and human connection. She saw the nuns' robust health, their occasional laughter, their focus on mundane tasks like gardening and sewing, as distractions from true spiritual devotion. A collective murmur rippled through the crowd. This sounded like madness. Her journal, Dr. Thorne continued, holding it aloft, details a chilling ideology. She believed that true spiritual purification could only be achieved through suffering, not self-inflicted penance, as is common in some orders, but a cleansing of the weak and impure from the convent. She meticulously researched ancient texts, obscure herbal remedies, and even old, forgotten medical treatises, searching for a substance that would cause a slow, purifying decline without immediate suspicion. He visibly shuddered. She found it. A compound derived from a rare local plant, when processed with certain minerals and exposed to the air, created a slow-acting poison that mimicked the symptoms of a rapidly progressing fever, draining the victim's vitality, inducing extreme chills and delirium, precisely as we observed. My blood ran cold. The image of Aunt Martha, frail and suffering, flashed in my mind. She was not just sick, she was a victim of a monstrous, twisted ideology. Her goal, Dr. Thorne explained, his voice filled with a mixture of horror and scientific detachment, was to weed out those she deemed unworthy, The nuns who were too cheerful, too social, who complained about discomforts, or who showed any attachment to the outside world. She believed that by systematically eliminating them, the convent would be purified, becoming a truly spiritual haven, a beacon of pure devotion, even if it meant sacrificing the lives of her own sisters. She viewed their deaths not as murder, but as a necessary purification, a divine selection. The crowd erupted in a cacophony of outrage, disbelief, and horror. "Madness!" someone shouted. "She's a lunatic!" another cried. But Dr. Thorne, his face grim, insisted on reading excerpts from the journal, passages that chillingly laid bare Mother Superior Althea's fanatical convictions. Her meticulous notes on the nuns' spiritual progress as they sickened, her cold calculations of dosage and projected timelines for their purification, left no doubt about the premeditated nature of her crimes. Thomas's role as Althea's unwitting accomplice became tragically clear. He was a tool exploited for his poverty and his access to the convent's daily routines. She had provided him with the rosary polish, instructing him on its application, playing on his innocent belief that he was helping to preserve holy artifacts. The small, worn leather gloves he used, inadequate against the corrosive substance, explained the marks on his hands and his own gradual poisoning. He was another victim of Althea's twisted crusade, a young boy used to commit unspeakable atrocities against the very women he served. The fate of Aunt Martha, my beloved Sister Agnes, became the most immediate and agonizing concern. Dr. Thorne confirmed that she, along with several other nuns, was still gravely ill, but with the poison identified and Thomas removed, there was hope. He immediately began administering a series of treatments, antidotes based on his knowledge of the local flora and the precise symptoms he had observed. The quarantine, though still in effect, now felt different. It was no longer a barrier against an unknown enemy, but a secure zone where healing could begin, and where justice could finally be served. The arrest of Mother Superior Althea sent shockwaves far beyond Willow Creek, reaching the ears of the regional diocese and even the state authorities. A special tribunal was convened, and she was swiftly removed from her position. Her trial, held later that year, was a sensation, drawing observers from across the state. Despite her vehement denials and claims of divine mandate, the evidence was overwhelming. Thomas's testimony, the poison-laced rosary, the vial in her chambers, and the chilling entries in her journal. She was found guilty of multiple counts of murder, though the exact number of victims was still being determined as more sisters succumbed to the lingering effects of the poison even after the main source was removed. She was sentenced to spend the remainder of her days in a state asylum, deemed both dangerous and utterly insane, her twisted piety a perversion of faith. The Convent of the Sacred Heart, once a symbol of peace, now carried the heavy burden of its dark history. The surviving nuns, though physically recovering, were left traumatized by the experience, their faith shaken, their community shattered. Some chose to leave the order, unable to reconcile their devotion with the horrors they had endured. Others remained, dedicating themselves to healing their convent, transforming the sanctuary of suffering into a place of remembrance and quiet solace for the lost. My aunt, Sister Agnes, was among the fortunate few who recovered. Her recovery was slow, a testament to the insidious nature of the poison. But she regained her health, her gentle spirit unbroken. When I finally saw her weeks later after the quarantine was lifted, her face was still pale, but her eyes, though, bearing the faint shadow of what she had endured, were filled with a profound gratitude. She embraced me tightly, tears streaming down her face. "My brave Samuel," she whispered, her voice weak but clear. "You saved us. You saved me." The experience changed me forever. I was no longer just a curious boy. I had witnessed the depths, of human depravity, but also the enduring power of truth and courage. The chilling deaths of the 12 healthy nuns in an Ohio convent in 1834 and the monstrous why behind it became a grim chapter in Willow Creek's history, a somber reminder that even in the most sacred of places, darkness could take root. But it also taught me the invaluable lesson that even a single boy, armed with curiosity and a burning desire for justice, could expose the most chilling of secrets, bringing light to the darkest of shadows. The memory of the lost sisters and the terrifying legacy of Mother Superior Althea would forever remind me of the fragile line between faith and fanaticism and the enduring power of human resilience in the face of unspeakable evil.